Listen to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Level B1, Oxford Reading University. Part 1.
These events took place in the late 18th century. In August, the waters of the Atlantic Ocean were still covered by thick ice, so the ship of the young English adventurer Roger Walton was moving very slowly. In search of a magic northern land, he aimed at reaching the North Pole. One day, his sailors noticed a figure racing past the ship. It was a sledge pulled by dogs. Inside was a man-like figure, but it was much bigger than a regular human being. The next morning, they discovered giant pieces of ice around the ship. On one of them was another sledge. Inside they found a man, tired and frozen. All but one of his dogs had sunk. He was heading north too, and Roger asked him to come on board at once. Soon the man got a fever, and it lasted for days. When he woke up, he told Roger that he had been hunting his enemy, and that he had suffered a great lot. Every night Roger wrote down everything the man told him. The following is his story. 1. My name is Victor Frankenstein. I belong to an aristocratic Swiss family of Geneva. Both my father and mother admired me and each other. In their union, true love was of great value, and they taught me to appreciate it. Once we took a trip to Italy. While we were staying there, we visited a poor man's house. The children that lived there were unhealthy. They were thin and dressed in torn, untidy clothing. But one girl, unlike the others, was of incredible beauty. She had fair hair and clear blue eyes. She was the daughter of noble parents, who had died several years ago. My mother persuaded my father to take the girl into our family. Her name was Elizabeth. For me, she had always been more than a sister. I knew that one day she would be mine. In the following years, my mother gave birth to 2 sons, Ernest and William. My parents hired a governess, Justine, who was as gentle and kind to us as we were to her.
Do you want more fascinating English stories with translations and transcriptions? You're going to love appewa.com. You can listen to English audiobooks and learn new words every day.
What a rare happiness it must have been to spend my childhood years in such a family. At school, I made friends with a boy named Henry Clerval. He was my only friend. The mysteries of life and nature amazed me. One occasion forever defined my path to natural science. I happened to come across a book by the alchemist, Cornelius Agrippa. Soon I became fascinated by alchemy. I read about the magic powers that could change nature and create life. My quick young mind made my passion grow stronger. When I was 15, I experienced another episode of importance. I saw lightning completely destroy a giant tree. The power of electricity amazed me. I forgot about alchemy and switched over to science, which had a natural basis. Looking back now, I realize that then I had a chance to avoid the horror that came after. But one is unable to trick one's destiny. When I was 17, my mother got scarlet fever. Before she died, she expressed her last will. "Children, it is painful for me to leave you," she told Elizabeth and me. "If you promise me that you will get married and watch over my sons, I will accept death peacefully." At that time, I was going to study at university in Bavaria. However, I decided to stay at home for 2 more weeks. I wanted to give comfort to my brothers, my father, and Elizabeth. And then I left with a heavy heart. 2. My university was located in Ingolstadt, a well-educated city of advanced knowledge. I found myself in the hands of Mr. Waldman, professor of chemistry. He was pleasant both in appearance and manner. At the very first lecture, he spoke the words that would destroy my whole life. The ancient teachers of this science promised the impossible and achieved nothing, he announced. Instead, the scientists of today have found valuable knowledge. One day, they will be able to control nature. My mind was then fixed on one ambition. I will explore the deepest mysteries of life, I thought. I couldn't sleep that night, and in the morning I hurried to the university. I wanted to talk to Mr. Waldman about my intentions. The professor agreed to guide me in my studies. Plenty of discoveries will be made in chemistry, he told me. Then he took me to his laboratory and explained the purpose of various chemical instruments. My destiny was determined. Soon I achieved great academic results. I grew fascinated by the issue of the human body. Where, I asked myself, does life appear? I studied the anatomy carefully, but found no answer. Eventually, I turned towards the natural ending of life. I started studying death and decay of the human body. And one day, the mystery of life was solved. But I will not share my secret with you. Soon you'll understand how dangerous forbidden knowledge can be. I was consumed by work. I hardly slept at night. I gathered the essential human parts, bones and substances that a body consists of. I was going to create a new life. I kept my work carefully hidden from others. I was confident about success and inspired by it. I seemed to have lost all sense, all connection with reality. I began to notice that I grew weak. At night I woke up with a fever, and stressful thoughts filled my mind. Months passed. One rainy November night I saw that my work was finished. The creature opened its eyes. It breathed and moved. Horror consumed me. I didn't see a man, but a monster. He was extremely tall. His legs and arms were hardly attached to the body. His dead skin was yellow, as well as his eyes. I couldn't stand the sight of him, and ran to the next room. I walked nervously back and forth till I lost strength and fell onto the bed. In my dream I saw Elizabeth. As I bent down to kiss her, I realized I was kissing my mother's dead body. When I opened my eyes, I saw the monster. He had pulled the bed curtain and was looking at me. He opened his mouth and smiled. He tried to tell me something. Frightened, I ran out of the apartment and walked around the streets until the next morning. When I was going home, a carriage stopped near me. Henry Clerval, my old friend, stepped out. "My dear Victor, I have convinced my father to let me go to university," he said. "How is my family?" I asked. "They are fine, but they wonder why you don't write to them," Henry replied. "But look at yourself. You are so thin and pale. Have you been sleeping well?" I explained that I had studied a great deal and couldn't get any rest. As we came closer to my apartment, I began shaking with fear. I went in first and found out that the monster was gone, to my great pleasure. Clerval walked in. I was very cheerful. even too cheerful. I laughed unnaturally. Suddenly it seemed to me that the monster was attacking me. "Ah, save me!" I cried out, throwing myself into my friend's arms. After that, I fell into a fever that lasted for several months. My friend took care of me. When winter began, I finally came to my senses. I felt much better and spent peaceful and careless days with Henry. Eventually, I forgot the horror that had troubled me for a whole year. In spring, I intended to go back home. 3. Soon I received a very sad letter from my father. "My dear Victor, you must be expecting a warm and pleasant welcome from us, but you are to see us crying instead. Your little brother William has been murdered. He and Ernest were playing hide-and-seek, and William hid in the forest, but he never came back. I found his dead body in the morning. There were finger marks on his throat. Oh, Victor, our poor sweet Elizabeth states she is guilty for William's death. She let him take a golden locket with his mother's portrait. Elizabeth is sure someone wanted to steal the expensive locket and killed the boy because of it. Come home, Victor. Your heartbroken father, Alphonse Frankenstein." I arrived in Geneva at night. I walked through the forest where my younger brother had died. It was raining heavily. Suddenly I noticed a huge man behind a tree. There could be no mistake. As lightning shone through the dark, I recognized my horrible monster. Fear held me, and I couldn't move. He saw me and left. I knew he had taken my brother's life. I entered my father's house in the early morning hours. "Victor," I heard Ernest's voice, "come and share our pain." He held me tight in his arms, and we both cried. "Elizabeth considers herself guilty," Ernest said, "but now that the murderer has been discovered—" "Discovered?" I shouted. "Yes, it was Justine." "Justine!" I cried out. "What a terrible lie!" "It is the truth," my brother replied. "Among her things they found the golden locket. She will be judged today in court." Of course, I had to be honest with my family about everything. But what if they thought I was a madman? I didn't say anything. The next day, Justine was found guilty. She was to be executed. Justine tried to prove that someone had set her up with the locket, but she was too confused and heartbroken at the death of William. She was unable to speak for herself properly. So the innocent girl was executed, and I, the real criminal, remain unpunished. 4. After Justine's death, my mental condition became even more miserable. We moved to a country house. I often took a boat to the middle of the lake. I dreamed of hiding forever in the still waters and releasing myself from pain and fear. But I couldn't do that to Elizabeth and my dear father. One day I went to the nearby mountains. I wished to be alone with the greatness of nature. There I could forget about my violent destiny. I sat for a while at the top of a mountain. Suddenly I saw a figure racing toward me with superhuman speed. It was the hated monster. My whole body shook with fear, and my eyes went dark, but I convinced myself to face my enemy bravely. "Monster! Oh, how I wish I could destroy you and bring my dear ones back to life," I cried out. "My master," he began, "hear my story. I have come to make a deal with you, and if you accept it, We will go our separate ways. I refused to listen. Fight me, till one of us falls dead, I told him. Believe me, I am only a monster because people have been rough and unfair to me, he went on. How can they love me if even you, my maker, dislike me so much? If you had loved me, I wouldn't have been so miserable. Get out, I cried. Come, he continued. The cold mountain air is dangerous for your body. There is a small house here. I doubted his every word, but eventually I followed him. In the house he lit a fire, and I prepared to listen. This is what he told me. 5. I hardly remember my first impressions of life. Then I started experiencing light, dark, hunger, and cold and fire. This is how I became aware of the world. I spent many days in the wild forest before I reached the first human village. I entered a house and saw an old man. He cried out and ran away. At his cry, the villagers gathered. I was glad to see them, but they beat me with stones and sticks. In fear, I ran away into the field and hid in a small cottage attached to a house. I was lonely and I cried, but finally I fell asleep. Through a hole in one of the walls I could see what was happening in the house. 3 people lived there, an old man, a girl, and a boy. I watched them all day, and then I couldn't sleep from excitement. I wanted to talk to them, but I was frightened. I watched them for many days and soon learned that they were quite unhappy. The reason for this was poverty. I have to admit it was partly my fault. I used to steal from them at night to feed myself, but then I stopped. Instead, I started helping them. At night, I made wood for the fire and left it under their door. When they first noticed it, they were happy, and so was I. Soon I learned to recognize the sounds they used to define objects, and even each other. After many months, I learned some words: fire, wood, Agatha, Felix. One night in the forest, I saw my face reflected in the water. I understood why people were shouting and beating me. Unlike my keen, beautiful friends, I had horrible, ugly features. Soon winter turned to spring, and one day a strange girl came to the house.
Part 2 is coming soon. Did you subscribe to our channel? Stay tuned to get more audiobooks like this. And now, enjoy another English story.